Most people think courage looks loud. They're wrong. Sometimes it looks like a tired waitress making one impossible choice. The rain tapped softly against the diner windows as I wiped down table 14 for the third time that hour. It was almost midnight, and the neon open sign buzzed above the door like it was struggling to stay awake right along with me. My feet ached. My coffee had gone cold 40 minutes earlier, and the only customers left were a truck driver nursing a slice of apple pie and a couple arguing quietly in a corner booth. It should have been an ordinary night, the kind of night that disappears from memory before the next morning arrives. Instead, it became the night that changed everything. I was carrying a tray of empty mugs toward the kitchen when headlights swept across the parking lot outside. At first, I barely noticed. Cars came and went all the time. But then more lights appeared. And more. One set after another. I slowed near the window. A line of black SUVs rolled into the lot from opposite directions. Engines idled. Doors opened. Men stepped out. Not one or two. Dozens. Even from inside, I could feel something strange in the air. The truck driver noticed them too. He turned in his booth and frowned. Nobody spoke. Nobody laughed. Nobody seemed lost. They moved with purpose, like they all knew exactly why they were there. Then I saw the man standing alone near the far end of the lot. He hadn't arrived with any of them. He was already there. Tall, dark coat, hands in his pockets. Rain gathered on his shoulders, but he didn't seem to care. 30 men surrounded him in a widening circle. And somehow he looked like the calmest person in the entire parking lot. I remember feeling a chill crawl up my spine. Not because I recognized him. I didn't. Not yet. But because of the way everyone else watched him. The way they hesitated. The way they kept glancing toward him as if they expected something. I set the tray down without realizing it. One of the coffee mugs rattled against another. The sound felt impossibly loud. The couple in the corner stopped arguing and looked outside. Even the cook stepped out of the kitchen. Nobody knew what was happening, but everyone understood enough to stay away from the windows. Everyone except me. The man never moved. Rain dripped from his dark hair. White security lights reflected across the wet pavement around him. The circle tightened. A few men exchanged words I couldn't hear. The stranger simply watched them, waiting, measuring, calm in a way that didn't make sense. Then he turned slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face beneath the parking lot lights. Sharp features, pale eyes, expression unreadable. He looked tired, not frightened, not angry, just tired. And for reasons I still can't explain, that unsettled me more than anything else. A man facing impossible odds should have looked worried. He should have looked desperate. Instead, he looked like someone carrying a burden much heavier than whatever was happening outside. The rain grew harder. Water streamed down the glass between us. One of the men stepped forward. Another followed. The truck driver quietly reached for his phone. The cook whispered something under his breath. And I found myself staring at the stranger, unable to look away. Because in that moment, surrounded by 30 men under a midnight storm, Grant Callahan looked less afraid of what might happen to him than of what might happen to everyone else. I should have looked away. That is what any sensible person would have done. Instead, I stood frozen beside the window, my hand still resting on the edge of the counter as rain streaked down the glass. Outside, the circle grew tighter. Inside, the diner had gone strangely quiet. Even the old jukebox in the corner seemed to hum more softly. Nobody wanted to admit they were watching. But everyone was watching. My heart pounded hard enough to make my chest ache. One of the men outside lifted a hand and pointed toward Grant. Another moved closer. A third glanced toward the road as if checking for something. Or someone. The tension was impossible to miss. It hung over the parking lot like the storm clouds above us. The truck driver finally unlocked his phone. I saw his thumb hover over the screen. Then he stopped. His shoulders sagged. Slowly, he slipped the phone back into his pocket. The cook disappeared into the kitchen. The arguing couple stood and moved away from the windows. One by one, everyone found a reason not to be involved. I understood them. I really did. Most people have responsibilities. Families. Bills. Lives they cannot afford to risk. But as I stared through the rain, a memory surfaced that I had spent years trying to bury. I was 16 again, standing outside Mercy General Hospital, watching strangers walk past while my father sat alone on a bench struggling to breathe. Everyone had noticed. Nobody had stopped. Nobody had asked if he needed help. They had simply kept walking. By the time someone finally called for assistance, it had been too late. The memory hit me so hard I could barely swallow. I blinked and looked back toward the parking lot. 30 men. One man standing alone. And a diner full of people pretending not to see. A loud crack of thunder rolled across the sky. The lights flickered. That was when I noticed the emergency alarm box mounted on the brick wall beside the hallway leading to the restrooms. Every strip mall in the county had one. Bright red. Impossible to miss. My eyes locked on it. A terrible idea formed instantly. I pushed it away just as quickly. No, absolutely not. This was none of my business. I was a waitress making $14 an hour plus tips. I had rent due in 6 days. My car needed new brakes. I could not afford problems. But the more I looked outside, the harder it became to stand still. Grant had not moved. Rain soaked through his coat. Water dripped from his hair. Yet he remained calm. Waiting. Watching. Somehow that made it worse. Then his gaze shifted. For the briefest second, he looked directly toward the diner. Toward the windows. Toward me. I do not know how he saw me through the rain. I do not know why that moment felt so important. But it did. My feet started moving before my brain caught up. I crossed the diner. Past the hallway. Reached the alarm box. Every instinct screamed that I was making a mistake. I grabbed the handle anyway. For 1 second I hesitated. Then I pulled. The response was immediate. A piercing alarm exploded through the shopping center. Red emergency strobes flashed from building to building. Bright security lights snapped on across the entire parking lot. Cameras mounted along the rooftops rotated toward the commotion. The sudden noise shattered the stillness like a rock through glass. Several men outside looked up in surprise. Others turned toward the flashing lights. Vehicles in the neighboring lot began activating their own alarms. The entire area transformed in seconds. What had been hidden by darkness was now illuminated from every angle. I stepped back, my pulse racing. The truck driver stared at me like I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. Outside, movement erupted across the parking lot. The careful formation broke apart. People started looking around, pointing, talking, and right in the middle of it all, Grant finally moved. Not in panic, not in fear, just a single smooth step backward, as if he had been waiting for exactly this kind of distraction. Then he turned his head toward the diner once more. Even through sheets of rain and flashing red lights, I felt it. Those pale eyes found mine, locked onto mine. And in that instant, I realized something that made my stomach drop. He knew exactly who had pulled the alarm. For the next 2 days, I convinced myself I would never see him again. That was the story I told myself while pouring coffee, refilling ketchup bottles, and counting tips at the end of my shifts. It was a good story. A comforting story. The kind people tell themselves when reality feels too complicated. By Thursday afternoon, I almost believed it. Almost. The lunch rush had finally slowed. Sunlight streamed through the diner windows, turning the chrome edges of the booths into strips of silver light. I was carrying a fresh pot of coffee when the front door opened. The little bell above it chimed once. Then everything inside me went still. Grant Callahan stepped through the doorway. No rain. No flashing lights. No crowd surrounding him. Just a man wearing a charcoal gray jacket and dark jeans. He looked different in daylight. More human. More dangerous. Somehow both at the same time. The conversations around the diner continued normally. Nobody else seemed to recognize him. Nobody else noticed the way my pulse instantly doubled. Grant glanced around the room, once before choosing a booth near the window. Booth 7. The same booth my father used to sit in every Saturday morning years ago. The memory hit me unexpectedly. Grant slid into the seat and picked up a menu. His expression never changed. I stood frozen beside the counter. Martha, the afternoon manager, looked up from the register. "Claire," she asked, "you planning to take that table or just stare at it all day?" Heat rushed into my face. I grabbed a coffee pot and forced my legs to move. By the time I reached booth 7, my hands felt suspiciously unsteady. Grant looked up as I approached. Those pale eyes settled on me immediately. Recognition flickered there. Calm. Certain. "Coffee?" I asked. My voice sounded normal. "Somehow. Please," he replied. His voice was deep and controlled. The same voice I remembered from the parking lot. I filled his cup. He thanked me. That was all. No mention of the alarm. No mention of the storm. No mention of the fact that I had spent 2 nights wondering whether a powerful stranger knew exactly where I worked. He ordered a turkey club and black coffee. Then he opened a newspaper and started reading. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. He ate quietly, read quietly, Paid attention to absolutely nothing. Or at least that was how it appeared. Yet every time I glanced toward booth 7, I found him watching the room. Not me specifically. The room. The entrance. The parking lot. The customers. Everything. He noticed details most people ignored. A delivery truck arriving across the street. A man lingering too long near the gas station next door. A car that circled the lot before leaving. It was subtle, almost invisible, but once I noticed it, I could not stop noticing it. When he finally paid his bill, he left a generous tip and walked out without saying another word. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt unsettled. The next day he returned. Same booth. Same coffee. Same newspaper. The day after that, he came back again. Booth 7. Coffee. Lunch. Quiet observation. By the 4th visit, even Martha noticed. Your mystery customer is becoming a regular, she joked. I forced a smile. Inside, I felt anything but relaxed. Because something else had started happening too. A black SUV appeared across the street during my shifts. Not every hour. Not every day. Just often enough for me to notice. Sometimes it sat near the gas station. Sometimes near the pharmacy. Sometimes near the diner itself. Whenever I looked closely, the vehicle would eventually leave. I told myself it was coincidence. Then Friday night arrived. My shift ended at 10. The parking lot was nearly empty as I walked toward my car. Cool autumn air brushed against my face. I reached into my purse for my keys and froze. Across the street, beneath a flickering street lamp, sat the same black SUV. Its engine idled quietly. I could not see the driver. My stomach tightened. For several seconds I stood completely still. Then another vehicle turned the corner and passed between us. When it cleared, the SUV was gone. Just gone. Like it had never been there at all. I drove home with both hands gripping the steering wheel. And for the first time since the storm, I began to wonder whether Grant Callahan had really come back to thank me, or whether he had come back to make sure nobody else got to me first. The following week should have felt normal. Instead, every day seemed to carry a quiet tension I could not explain. I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before. The reflection of cars and storefront windows. People lingering too long near intersections. The feeling of being observed when nobody appeared to be looking. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe Grant Callahan had simply unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. But the feeling refused to go away. Tuesday afternoon brought cold wind and gray skies. Business at the diner was slow. Grant arrived at exactly 1:15, took his usual seat at booth 7, and ordered coffee. Nothing unusual. Nothing threatening. Yet the moment he walked through the door, I found myself watching him more closely than ever. He seemed distracted. Not nervous. Focused. Like a man trying to solve a problem nobody else could see. Twice he glanced toward the front windows. 3 times he checked the parking lot. Once he looked directly toward the security camera mounted above the cash register. By the time I delivered his sandwich, my patience had run out. Are you going to tell me what is going on? I asked quietly. Grant looked up from his coffee. What do you mean? I mean the vehicles outside. The people who keep appearing and disappearing. The fact that you show up every day and somehow manage to know everything happening in this room. His expression remained calm. Almost annoyingly calm. That sounds like a very specific concern. Because it is. I folded my arms. I think someone is following me. For the first time, something shifted behind his eyes. Not surprise. Concern. Real concern. He set down his coffee cup. Why do you think that? I immediately regretted bringing it up. The words sounded ridiculous now that they were out loud. But I told him anyway. The black SUV. The strange feeling. The vehicle outside my apartment building 2 nights earlier. The man I had seen standing near the gas station pretending to look at his phone while watching the diner. The more I talked, the quieter Grant became. When I finished, he stared through the front window for several seconds. You should have told me sooner, he said. A spark of anger flared inside me. Why would I tell you anything? His gaze returned to mine. Because you are worried. And you are not. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. Somewhere in the kitchen, a plate crashed onto the floor. The normal sounds of life continued around us. Yet booth 7 suddenly felt isolated from the rest of the world. Grant, I said carefully, are those your people? He frowned slightly. What people? The ones watching me. Silence. A long silence. Then he leaned back against the booth and crossed his arms. No. The answer came immediately. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just one word. Yet somehow it did not comfort me. Then why are you here every day? I asked. His jaw tightened. That is a different question. My pulse quickened. Answer it. For the first time since I had met him, Grant looked genuinely frustrated. Not angry. Frustrated. Like someone trying to protect a secret that was becoming impossible to hide. He glanced toward the windows again. Toward the parking lot. Toward the street beyond it. Then he looked back at me. Claire. My name sounded different coming from him. He lowered his voice. Look at the blue sedan across the street. I turned carefully. A faded blue sedan sat beside the pharmacy. Nothing unusual. Now look at the driver. I squinted. A man sat behind the wheel. Baseball cap. Sunglasses. Ordinary. He has been there for 4 hours, Grant said quietly. My stomach dropped. How do you know that? Because I noticed him yesterday too. A chill moved through me. Who is he? Grant did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched the man through the glass. The calm expression I had grown used to was gone. Something darker had replaced it. Not fear. Calculation. The expression of a man connecting pieces of a puzzle he did not like. Finally, he spoke. Very softly. That is the problem. His eyes narrowed slightly. I do not know who he is. And for the first time since the night of the storm, Grant Callahan looked worried. I barely made it through the rest of my shift. Every time I glanced toward the pharmacy, the blue sedan was still there. Every time I looked away and looked back again, it remained. Patient. Unmoving. Watching. By closing time, my nerves felt stretched so tight they might snap. Grant stayed longer than usual. He drank 2 cups of coffee he barely touched and spent most of the evening staring through the diner windows. When Martha finally flipped the sign from open to closed, he stood at the same moment I untied my apron. That coincidence felt far too convenient. I will walk you to your car, he said. It was not phrased as a question. I can walk myself. I know. His expression softened slightly. That is not why I offered. The parking lot was cold and quiet beneath the glow of the streetlights. The blue sedan was gone now. Somehow that bothered me more than if it had stayed. We reached my car in silence. I unlocked the driver's door and turned toward him. Tell me the truth. Grant slipped his hands into his coat pockets. About what? Everything. For several seconds he said nothing. Traffic hummed in the distance. A train horn echoed somewhere beyond town. The wind pushed loose strands of hair across my face. Finally he exhaled. Not heavily. Just enough to tell me he had reached a decision. The night you pulled that alarm, he said quietly, you changed more than you realize. My stomach tightened. How? His eyes remained fixed on mine. The people surrounding me that night were not random men. I remembered the storm, the circle, the tension hanging in the air. Who were they? People looking for information. His answer was careful, deliberately careful. Information about what? About me. The cold seemed sharper suddenly, and they did not find it. No. His jaw tightened. Because everything changed the moment the alarm started. I stared at him. You were telling me that pulling a fire alarm caused all of this. Not the alarm itself. He shook his head. The cameras. Confusion flashed across my face. Grant noticed. Every security camera in that shopping center turned toward the parking lot when the emergency system activated. Understanding arrived slowly. Someone saw what happened. Yes. And they know I was there. Grant nodded once. My pulse started hammering. Then why have you not told me this before? Because I was hoping I was wrong. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Grant looked away briefly toward the dark highway. For the first time since meeting him, he appeared tired. Not physically tired. Burdened. 3 days after the storm, someone started asking questions about the diner. A chill crawled down my spine. Questions about me. Questions about the waitress who triggered the emergency response. My mouth went dry. Who? His expression darkened. That is what I have been trying to find out. Suddenly dozens of small details snapped together inside my mind. The SUV. The man near the gas station. The blue sedan. The feeling of being watched. None of it had been imagination. None of it had been paranoia. It had been real all along. Grant. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. Am I in danger? He did not answer immediately. That silence told me more than words could have. Grant. This time I almost whispered it. His gaze returned to mine. Steady. Serious. I think someone believes you saw something important that night. Fear settled into my chest like ice water. But I did not see anything. I know that. Then why would they care? A bitter smile touched his face for less than a second. Because people chasing answers are not always interested in facts. The wind swept across the empty parking lot again. I wrapped my arms around myself. Everything felt different now. The diner, the storm, the strangers outside my apartment. All of it connected in ways I had never imagined. Grant took one step closer. Not threatening, not possessive, protective. "Claire," he said quietly, "listen to me very carefully." Something in his tone made my heart stop. "You did not save a stranger that night." His eyes locked onto mine. "You accidentally placed yourself in the middle of something much larger than either of us." And for the first time, I understood that the target I had been feeling was real. I did not sleep that night. Every creak of my apartment building sounded different. Every set of headlights passing outside made me glance toward the window. By 3 in the morning, I was sitting on my couch wrapped in a blanket with a cold cup of tea in my hands, staring at nothing. Grant's words kept replaying in my mind. "You accidentally placed yourself in the middle of something much larger than either of us." The sentence felt impossible. I was Claire Bennett, 24 years old, waitress, rent-paying, coupon clipping, student loan-carrying Claire Bennett. People like me did not end up in the middle of dangerous situations. People like me worried about utility bills and broken appliances. Yet when dawn finally arrived, the uneasy feeling remained. 2 days later, everything changed again. I was finishing an afternoon shift when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored calls like that. Something made me answer. "Hello." Silence. Not complete silence. Breathing. Faint but unmistakable. Then the line disconnected. I stared at the screen. A minute later, the phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, nobody spoke at all. The call ended after 6 seconds. By the third call, my hands were shaking. I blocked the numbers. New ones appeared anyway. That evening, I found Grant sitting at booth 7 before I even started my shift. One look at my face, and his expression changed. "What happened?" he asked. I slid into the seat across from him. "Someone keeps calling." He listened without interrupting while I explained everything. The calls, the silence, the feeling that someone was trying to let me know they were there. Grant's jaw tightened slightly. He asked to see my phone. For several minutes, he studied the call history. His face revealed nothing. That somehow worried me more. "Grant." He looked up. "You are not staying alone tonight." The statement landed like a stone in my stomach. "Excuse me." "You heard me. I am not moving into witness protection." A faint smile appeared for the first time all day. "Good. Because I do not have witness protection." Despite myself, I almost laughed. Almost. The tension remained too heavy. Grant leaned forward slightly. "Claire, I need you to trust me." The request caught me off guard. Trust was not a word I associated with him. Power, confidence, control. Those fit. Trust felt different. More personal. More vulnerable. "What?" I asked quietly. For a second, he seemed surprised by the question. Then his expression softened. "Because I would not be sitting here if I wanted something from you." The diner noise faded around us. Dishes clattered. Customers talked. Coffee machines hissed. Yet none of it seemed to matter. "Then why are you here?" I asked. The answer came immediately. Because nobody should face this alone. Something inside me shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough to matter. Later that night, after my shift ended, Grant drove me to a property on the edge of town. I expected gates, guards, luxury. Instead, I found a large farmhouse sitting on several quiet acres beneath a sky filled with stars. The porch light glowed warm against the darkness. Wind moved gently through rows of maple trees. The place felt peaceful, ordinary, human. "This is yours?" I asked. One of them. The answer should have sounded arrogant. Somehow it did not. Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and cedar wood. Books lined shelves along the walls. Framed photographs sat on tables. Not pictures of wealth or power. Pictures of families. Weddings. Children. Old memories. The details surprised me. I had built an image of Grant in my mind. An untouchable man surrounded by luxury and fear. Yet the house felt lived in. Comfortable. Real. As I stood there taking everything in, Grant loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves. The gesture was so ordinary it startled me. Suddenly, he looked less like a powerful figure everyone whispered about, and more like a man carrying responsibilities he never asked for. "You can stay here as long as necessary," he said. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The exhaustion behind his eyes. The tension he tried to hide. The constant awareness that never seemed to switch off. For the first time, I stopped wondering whether Grant Callahan was dangerous. Instead, I began wondering how long he had been carrying the weight of protecting everyone except himself. The farmhouse settled into a rhythm over the next few days. Mornings arrived with sunlight spilling across the kitchen table. Evenings ended with quiet conversations that somehow felt more honest than anything I had experienced in years. For the first time since the storm, I started breathing normally again. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made me nervous. Peace has a strange way of feeling temporary when you have spent weeks waiting for something to go wrong. Grant seemed to feel it too. He took more calls than usual. He spent longer hours in his office. Sometimes I would catch him standing near the front window after midnight, staring into the darkness beyond the property line. Watching, listening, waiting. One afternoon, I found him on the back porch with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of autumn leaves across the fields. "You look exhausted," I said. A faint smile touched his face. "I have been called worse." "When was the last time you slept?" His smile faded. That answer told me everything. We sat together without speaking for a while. The silence felt comfortable, unexpectedly comfortable. Then his phone rang. I watched the color drain from his face as he listened. He stood immediately. "What happened?" I asked. He ended the call without answering. Another phone appeared in his hand. Then another call. Then another. Within minutes, the calm atmosphere around him vanished completely. The controlled man I had come to know disappeared behind something sharper. Focused. Intense. Every muscle in his body seemed locked tight. "Grant." This time my voice carried real concern. His eyes found mine. For a second I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. Not for himself. For me. "Stay inside," he said. "Do not leave this house." My stomach dropped. "What?" He hesitated. That hesitation scared me more than any answer could have. "Grant." He looked away briefly. "Someone accessed information connected to the diner." The words landed like ice water. "What kind of information?" "Employee records." My heart began hammering. "Mine." He nodded once. The world suddenly felt smaller. The farmhouse. The trees. The quiet fields. None of it seemed safe anymore. I thought nobody knew where I was. They did not. His jaw tightened. Until now. The next several hours passed in a blur. Vehicles arrived at the property. Men and women moved through the house carrying folders, laptops, phones. Nobody explained much, but I could feel the tension everywhere. People spoke quietly. Doors opened and closed. Plans were made. Through it all, Grant barely stopped moving. Yet every few minutes his eyes found me, making sure I was still there, making sure I was safe. As evening approached, rain began falling against the windows. Soft at first, then harder. The sound pulled me back to the night everything started. I stood in the living room watching the storm build beyond the glass. Suddenly, I realized the house had become unusually quiet. Too quiet. I turned. Grant was standing near the front entrance, speaking into his phone. His voice was low but urgent. Then he stopped speaking altogether. A moment later, he lowered the phone and closed his eyes briefly. Just briefly, but long enough for me to notice. "What is it?" I asked. He looked at me across the room. The distance between us felt enormous. "Grant." Slowly he walked closer. Rain tapped against the windows behind him. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly. Every sound seemed amplified. "Claire," he said quietly, "I need you to trust me again." My chest tightened. "What happened?" His expression remained steady, but I could see the strain underneath it now. "The people looking for answers have stopped looking at the diner." A chill swept through me. "Then what are they looking at?" His eyes never left mine. "You." And in that moment, I realized the danger was no longer circling somewhere far away. It was getting closer. The rain continued through most of the night. I sat near the living room window watching water race down the glass while the farmhouse settled into uneasy silence around me. Nobody said much after Grant told me the truth. There was nothing left to say. The danger was real. The questions were real. And somehow my ordinary life had become tangled with both. Around midnight, I found Grant standing alone in the kitchen. The overhead light cast soft shadows across the room. A half-finished cup of coffee sat untouched beside him. Papers covered the table. Names, addresses, notes, pieces of a puzzle I could not understand. He looked up when I entered. "You should be sleeping." I almost laughed. "I do not think that is happening tonight." A faint smile appeared before fading again. I crossed the room and sat opposite him. For a while, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed quietly. Rain tapped against the roof. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. The house felt strangely alive. "Can I ask you something?" I finally said. Grant nodded. "Why are you doing all this?" His expression did not change. "Doing what?" "Protecting me." The answer should have been obvious. Instead, silence stretched between us, long enough that I thought he might refuse to answer. Then he leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "Because somebody should have protected you before any of this started." The response caught me off guard. "You did not even know me." "That is not the point." His voice remained calm. "It should not matter whether I knew you." Something about those words stayed with me. Most powerful people I had met spent their lives deciding who mattered and who did not. Grant seemed different. Not perfect. Not innocent. Just different. I studied him for a moment. "Can I tell you something?" This time it was his turn to nod. I looked down at my hands. At the faint coffee stain on my sleeve from earlier that day. At all the ordinary details that suddenly felt important. When I was 16, my father collapsed outside a hospital. Grant remained silent. Listening. Really listening. There were people everywhere. Nurses. Visitors. Security guards. Strangers. My throat tightened slightly. Everybody saw him. The kitchen seemed quieter somehow. Nobody stopped. Grant asked softly. I shook my head. Eventually someone helped. But not right away. The memory still hurt after all these years. The helplessness. The frustration. The feeling that everyone had decided somebody else would step in. I remember standing there wishing one person would care enough to move first. My voice dropped almost to a whisper. Just one. Grant never looked away. That is why I pulled the alarm. Understanding flickered across his face. I saw 30 people waiting for someone else to do something. My eyes burned unexpectedly, and I promised myself a long time ago that if I ever got the chance, I would not be one of them. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The rain softened outside. The storm was finally beginning to pass. Grant stared at the table as though considering every word. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded different. Lower. More personal. Do you know what I saw that night? I looked up. What? His eyes met mine. I saw someone do the one thing nobody else was willing to do. My chest tightened. It was just an alarm. No. He shook his head slowly. It was courage. The words settled between us. Simple. Honest. Impossible to dismiss. For the first time since meeting him, I saw something vulnerable behind his carefully controlled expression. Not weakness. Gratitude. The kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. Most people spend their lives protecting themselves, he said quietly. You protected a stranger. I smiled sadly. That stranger turned out to be you. A genuine smile appeared on his face then. Small but real. The first one I had ever seen. Yes, he said. And that changed more than you know. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Moonlight broke through the clouds and spilled across the dark fields surrounding the farmhouse. For the first time in weeks, the world felt still. Yet as I sat there across from Grant Callahan, I realized something unexpected. The thing connecting us had never been fear. It had never been danger. It had been one decision. One moment. One choice made in the middle of a storm. And somehow that single choice had changed both of our lives forever. The following week arrived with clear skies and a kind of quiet I had almost forgotten existed. The constant tension that had followed me since the storm slowly began to fade. The strange calls stopped. The unfamiliar vehicles disappeared. Conversations around the farmhouse became lighter. Even Grant seemed different. Not relaxed exactly. I was not sure a man like Grant Callahan knew how to relax. But the weight on his shoulders no longer looked quite so heavy. One morning, I found him standing on the porch watching the sunrise spread across the fields. Golden light stretched over the grass while mist drifted above the ground like something from a dream. You look like you are waiting for bad news, I said. A small smile touched his face. Occupational habit. I joined him by the railing. For a while we stood there without speaking. The silence felt comfortable now. Familiar. Then Grant looked toward me. Everything is finished. The word seemed almost unreal. Finished. He nodded. The questions. The attention. The people looking for answers have moved on. I released a breath I had apparently been holding for weeks. Relief washed through me so suddenly it made me dizzy. So I can go home. The moment the words left my mouth, something unexpected happened. A shadow crossed his expression. Brief. Almost invisible. But I saw it. Grant immediately looked back toward the horizon. Yes, he said quietly. You can. 3 days later, I returned to my apartment. Then 2 days after that, I returned to the diner. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon greeted me. Martha nearly squeezed the air out of my lungs with her hug. Customers laughed. Plates clattered. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet somehow I felt different. Maybe because I knew how quickly everything could change. Maybe because I knew how much courage could matter in a single moment. The lunch rush arrived, then faded. The afternoon stretched peacefully forward. For the first time in a long while, I felt normal. Around 4 o'clock, the diner door opened again. I looked up automatically. My heart skipped. Grant walked inside. No entourage. No distractions. No urgency. Just Grant. Several customers glanced at him before returning to their meals. Nobody recognized him. Nobody understood how much had happened since the last time he sat in booth 7. He crossed the room and stopped beside the counter. Coffee? I asked softly. A smile appeared in his eyes. Please. I poured a cup and carried it to booth 7. He sat down exactly where he always had. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed something on the table. A small folded receipt. My brow furrowed. What is this? Open it. Carefully, I unfolded the paper. My breath caught immediately. It was the diner receipt from the night of the storm. The night everything began. The date remained visible near the top. Beneath it, written in neat handwriting, was a single message. You saved my life. Let me spend mine protecting yours. I stared at the words for several seconds. The noise of the diner faded into the background. The receipt trembled slightly in my hands. When I finally looked up, Grant was watching me. Not with power. Not with authority. Just honesty. Pure and simple. Grant. My voice failed completely. He shook his head gently. You changed something that night, Claire. Emotion tightened my chest. It was just an alarm. A familiar smile appeared on his face. The same smile from the farmhouse kitchen. No, he said softly. It was never just an alarm. Outside, the afternoon sun illuminated the parking lot where ordinary people came and went without realizing how fragile life could be. Inside, I looked down at the receipt one last time. Months earlier, I had believed courage meant doing something extraordinary. Now I understood the truth. Courage was often much smaller than that. Sometimes it was a tired waitress refusing to walk away. Sometimes it was a man learning that strength meant more than power. And sometimes one simple choice, made in the middle of a storm, could change 2 lives forever.